Howdy, Rex here. Today we're going to talk about long-range precision marksmanship. Now for the purposes of this series, we're discussing extreme long-range precision shooting, usually beyond 600-700 meters, sometimes beyond 1,000. So for the purposes of our instructional here, we're not going to discuss shooting offhand or shooting sitting or kneeling so much. We're going to concentrate on prone shooting positions because that's what's going to be required to deliver the degree of precision necessary to hit a small target at those kind of distances. So that's what we're going to focus on. Now a lot of guys really overcomplicate this and kind of argue the details, but it's actually a relatively simple process. First thing is you're going to want to establish a good natural point of aim in which you're in a comfortable shooting position where you can be relatively still, totally calm, close your eyes behind the rifle, open your eyes, and you should be right on target. After you got that, you're going to be exercising breathing control and finger control over your trigger so you can employ a good trigger squeeze so you have good control over when the round goes off, hopefully when the sights are exactly on target. And with that in sight picture in mind, by the time you send the round, it should be everything should be harmonically sound the way the rifle is laying and the way it's butted up against your shoulder, because the shooter and the rifle are going to kind of become one object, and everything has to be very consistent from shot to shot. So we'll kind of show you, we'll walk through the processes here, and we've already discussed a lot of this in detail in prior videos. So hopefully, if you get a little bit confused on some of the details of what we're talking about, go ahead and watch the prior videos. So, we're talking about shooting prone. There's a number of ways guys can do this. I would recommend using some sort of artificial support. You can get down on your elbows, but that's not going to be as steady as required. You're going to have to be extremely steady. The most commonly employed artificial support, and the one that I typically use, is a bipod, okay? And we discussed bipods earlier. I like to use the Harris 9 to 13 inch swiveling series, and it has notched legs. It's a little easier to deploy. Doesn't really matter exactly what you use as long as you can use it well and efficiently. But I like to use a bipod. And a note about bipods or whatever system you're going to be using is you want to anticipate all these things when you're zeroing your rifle and confirming your zeros. Because depending on how exactly you establish your firing position, you're going to have a different harmonic signature throughout the rifle. And that could potentially shift your point of impact significantly enough to miss. So if you're planning on using the rifle in the field for practical real-world applications, I would suggest zeroing the rifle and confirming your zeros using a bipod just as you would use in the field. Because if you don't, if you maybe shoot off a bench or confirm your zeros using a bench, your harmonics might shift significantly. Solid concrete bench or something like that is going to send a different vibratory response through the rifle and shift your point of impact. So you always want to zero the way you're going to be using it in the field. That's a fundamental thing just to remind you of, okay? A lot of guys might use something like this for artificial support, just a bag. And if you're using a bipod, or even if you're not, it's going to be a relatively simple process. Typically, you get this situated in a way where you can use it to support the rifle. If you come a little closer here, you'll see that you're going to get behind the rifle, and I'm going to use my left hand, my non-firing hand, to manipulate the toe of the stock. That's going to be used to apply any kind of corrections or adjust my fire. So I'm not going to be holding up here like a lot of guys would. If you're shooting just with your elbows, this would be a way to do it. But if the front is being artificially supported, you're going to have this free hand, and this is going to be very, very, very helpful. I would strongly recommend the use of some kind of artificial support for the toe, especially for extreme long-range shots. This is going to get you dead steady. This is going to get you extremely steady. It's going to be like a bench, a vice rest or something. So, and what you're going to do, and if you get a little closer here, you'll see, When I'm making micro adjustments, I'm going to be manipulating this little sandbag or beanbag or whatever you're using to make minor adjustments until I'm exactly on target, and then you'll go ahead and make the shot. And we'll explain those in a minute. Some things to be aware of, things you're not going to want to do. If you're using artificial support, such like a bag like this, you're going to want to try to get this thing to where it's consistently bedded on the support, okay? Because when this thing moves under recoil, it's going to be shifting around. And if it's shifting around to different positions from shot to shot, it's going to change your harmonic signature of the rifle. If you're using a big muzzle brake like this, it could amplify muzzle brake pull-off effect, which is going to pull you usually laterally, and that's not going to be good. So you're going to want to make sure you're nice and firmly seated in your artificial support. For example, you don't want to, if you can avoid something like this, if you look right here, I'm kind of propping it up to the side. Now for close range type stuff or medium range, this might not make a big difference. And as long as you can get steady, that's better than nothing. But if you're gonna lay down 1 or 2 shots or multiple shots, you're gonna wanna be consistent. And you're also gonna wanna be consistent with how you zeroed the rifle. Something like this could potentially change the harmonic signature of the rifle enough to make you miss the target. So you're gonna wanna have nice, even support both ways. That's one mistake that a lot of folks make, and something you do want to watch out for. Now, if you are using a bipod, and we talked about this a little more in a bipod video, obviously, if we're on even ground like this, it's going to be relatively simple. If you have a swiveling bipod, that's very helpful. But you're going to want to get her nice and steady, and you're going to want to probably load the bipod. Loading the bipod is simply applying a little bit of forward pressure. If you're like this, if you're pulling back, see how it's folding forward? That's going to drastically change how this rifle is sitting here in this position from shot to shot, because it's not being consistent. So if you apply just a tad bit of forward pressure on it, they call loading the bipod, it's going to really help you out harmonically. And especially under recoil, it's going to shift less. And every time it's easy to reestablish this exact level of tension if you're just preloading the bipod just a little bit. So you get behind the rifle, you got your artificial toe support. A lot of guys use a monopod, which is fine. Again, as long as if you had a monopod on here, you're going to want to make sure it's firmly bedded in the ground. You don't want it kind of propped up against the side like we showed earlier. If it's riding a rock funny, or if you got uneven terrain and you want that thing to be seated firmly and evenly in the ground as well. Okay, so you're going to want to be nice and solid and consistent from shot to shot. And you want to have, what you're trying to do is duplicate how the rifle was zeroed again. When the rifle was zeroed, what kind of position were you in? You're going to want to duplicate that. So usually, typically, you're going to want to zero it in soft ground like we have here. So it's going to be very similar to what it's going to be in the field. I do not like to confirm my zeros or zero my rifles, or even do load development in a bench rest type setting if I plan on employing that rifle out in real life, out in the ground. It does harmonically alter the system, and that will potentially change your point of impact. So just be aware of that. That's something that I prefer to do, is keep everything as consistent as possible. Now, in a less than ideal circumstance, you might find yourself in uneven terrain. And if we come right over here, let's say we got a situation like this, okay? Now there's a lot of different things you might be tempted to do. If you come kind of behind me here, and you're trying to establish a shooting position, your bipod ain't gonna really work. So you can fold up a leg like that. There's a lot of different things you can do to manipulate the rifle, kind of get to where my muzzle is not obstructed by too many branches here. Get behind the rifle like so. Now you might have to use your forward hand in positions like this to kind of stabilize things. This is less than ideal, but you're going to do whatever you can to get as much stability as possible. But the thing to take note of here is for extreme long range shots or shots on very small targets, if you're applying sideways pressure on the rifle to keep it stabilized, that's going to harmonically alter the rifle again, especially under recoil. And as we discussed earlier in a muzzle brake pull-off effect video, if you're not squarely behind the rifle, and what we're talking about that, just to refresh your memory here, is you're going to want to be on a big bore with an efficient muzzle brake. You're going to want to be in line with the rifle like this, okay? And what we're talking about is so that under recoil, the rifle's going to begin to pull forward a little bit due to the efficient muzzle brake, especially on a big bore rifle above 338 Lapua Magnum. This is just 30 cal, so it ain't going to make too much of a difference. But that can potentially pull you around. So in a situation like we showed over there, where you're applying sideways pressure and I wasn't located squarely behind the rifle, that's less than ideal, especially for one of those big bores with a highly efficient muzzle brake design. So you're going to want to take a lot of time and locate an area in which you can actually find a nice, comfortable shooting position with all those things in mind. And this is where, when you're selecting a final firing position, and we'll get into a video on more detailed on how to do that in a little while here, but that's one of the things you got to consider, is if you're laying goofy, if you got a goofy firing position where you're not really comfortable, something like this might seem relatively comfortable at first, but you got to imagine, if you come a little closer here, you might be in a position that's a little awkward, and you might have to kind of muscle yourself onto the target. And what we're talking about there is if the rifle's not nicely at rest, you're going to have to use your muscles to keep it on target. And that's going to be something that's going to really throw you off as well. All of a sudden the rifle is subject to be moved by your pulse, by your breathing a lot more. The objective here is to get the rifle to basically be at complete rest mechanically on its artificial support. The buttstock here, you might want to take note, is going to be placed into my shoulder. Even on a big recoiling rifle or a small one, you're going to want it a firm shoulder hold, but you're not going to want to be pushing into it too much. You don't want to pull it too tight. Hopefully you've got a muzzle brake or enough rifle weight to mitigate the recoil somewhat. But for long range precision shooting, the more you're muscling into the rifle, the more you're pulling it back. You don't want to be doing any more of that than is absolutely necessary. Preferably, what I like to have is I get behind the rifle. It's got nice rest. It's got an artificial support. And the rifle is going to basically be right on target. I'm going to be able to lock and load. And I can take some breaths. And I should be able to completely rest. Take a few breaths, close my eyes, relax. Open my eyes again. And the target should be perfectly on sight or very close to on sight from where I left it. That's called natural point of aim. And that basically means that naturally the rifle at rest is pointed dead on with the target. That's the best position you want to establish. That's what you're shooting for. If you close your eyes and you take a few breaths and you rest and you open and you're way off, that means that when you relaxed, something moved because you were muscling it onto target. And you're going to want to shift your position like so or whatever. Do whatever you got to do to get into a position where you're at a state of rest behind the rifle. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. Once you establish a good natural point of aim, the rest is relatively easy. If you don't establish a good natural point of aim, what you're going to have is you're going to be muscling the rifle. All of a sudden, things like breathing are going to tremendously move the sights. So if you're laying down and your crosshairs is moving back and forth across the target, and you can't seem to get steady, you don't have a good natural point of aim established. And you're going to want to find a more comfortable shooting position where when the rifle is at complete rest, it's right on sight. And again, if you have the toe support going on, you're going to manipulate that with your left hand. You're going to squish that bag around until you're on sight. And that's kind of the only part you're going to be muscling is through the toe support. You can, or even if you don't have a bag, you can flex your fist and kind of do it that way to get on sight. All right, the next thing we're going to want to talk about is sight picture. Now, for extreme long-range precision shooting, I assume you're going to be using an optic, okay? But some of the fundamentals are the same as with open sights. You're going to want to be consistently behind the optic squarely each time. Now, with open sights, you'd be able to tell relatively easily your rear sight's not going to align with the front sight. The way you're going to be able to tell on a scoped rifle is when you get behind it, and you're going to have your cheek on the cheek piece, And if everything's adjusted correctly and the scope is at the right height with the right rings mounted the correct distance in front, forward or backwards, you're going to be able to get behind your rifle and you're going to see a nice crisp view of the entire image around the whole periphery of the lens and the scope. You're going to see a nice crisp circle all the way around. Now if I cock my head off to one side too much, it might get a little blurry towards one side. That means that my sight picture ain't right. And I got to adjust my head right and left until I get perfect on both sides. Now if you get some kind of tunnel vision going on or you can't see it, that means you might be too close or too far from the optic. Now the way you would adjust that is to usually move the optic back or forward. So you need to remount the scope and make sure you're doing that properly. But you can watch the scope mounting video to get a better idea of how that works. So that's the basic idea of sight picture. And if you have an adjustable cheek piece, this could help give you a little bit of adjustment, but you're going to want to have good solid cheek weld. What we're talking about is your cheek is going to be consistently resting on the cheek piece from shot to shot. Some guys will put a piece of tape where their nose might come out to be so they get their forward and backwards, right? But if you're used to this, it's a relatively simple process. It's going to be natural. So you're going to just get behind the rifle naturally. It becomes muscle memory after a while. And then, yeah, all right, I have perfect sight picture all the way around. I see the target good. You're gonna wanna make sure your parallax is adjusted. If you have a parallax adjustment on your scope, so everything's in focus. If your crosshair seems to be out of focus with the target, that's an eyepiece adjustment issue. And you're gonna adjust that. And once you adjust that correctly for your eye, it's gonna be good for pretty much any distance. So that's a one-time adjustment usually. It might change from shooter to shooter a little bit. But you're gonna wanna make sure that your sight picture's good, you got good cheek weld. I'm at a good, I got a good natural point of aim. I'm exactly on target. I'm manipulating this toe of the rifle here. I'm dead centered on the target. So now I'm ready to start to go through the actual firing process. Now, breathing control is very important. The more you're muscling the rifle on target, the more important it becomes. But if you got a good natural point of aim, I can pretty much sit here and breathe all day, and it's not hardly moving the crosshairs from the target. It's not making a big effect. But if I had a less than ideal firing position, it might be moving it a little more than I want. But either way, you're gonna wanna have breath control. Now, there's a thing called a natural respiratory pause. When you breathe in, and you breathe out, and you breathe in, and you breathe out, there's that point in between the breaths where you pause naturally. That's the best place to terminate your breathing a little longer, and then you're gonna start to employ your trigger squeeze. If your crosshairs moves off target, you're gonna stop your trigger squeeze exactly where it's at until you're exactly on target again. You might wanna take a couple breaths to get another air supply. If you hold your breath too long, your muscles get twitchy and you get nervous and you ain't gonna be very steady. So you're gonna wanna make sure you have a good, comfortable, breath in. Some guys like to blow out, breathe in deep, blow the breath out halfways and pause there. That's not a natural respiratory pause, so it's not as good probably, but guys argue on that. That's actually the way I learned to do it. My father taught me to shoot that way and it works fine. But a natural respiratory pause is the best place to go. So I'm gonna breathe in, out, and then I pause. I'm real steady, and then I'm going to employ my trigger squeeze. Now, when we're talking about trigger squeeze, it's actually very simple. You're going to simply want to squeeze the trigger slowly and very carefully, not muscling the rifle around, but just squeeze the trigger as to not move the sights off the target. And you're gonna be going slow and smooth, and it should kinda almost be a surprise when it goes off on most of your standard triggers. If you pull the trigger too deliberately, especially on a rifle that's gonna encourage you to flinch, that's not gonna be good because you're gonna anticipate the recoil and it's gonna cause a flinch, and then you're gonna jerk. Everyone kind of flinches automatically. It's something that you're not gonna really be able to avoid, especially after the rifle does go bang. But the trick is to flinch after the rifle goes bang, okay? You want the bullet to be gone, and then you can flinch all you want. And the way that most guys train to do that is to basically squeeze so slow and easy to where it's almost a surprise, or it is a surprise when it actually goes off. And if you're employing a nice, steady, slow squeeze like that, and making sure your crosshairs or your point of aim is exactly where you want it to be, and employing your good breathing controls so you're not moving the rifle all over potentially, when it goes off as a surprise, if it was right on target, you've just delivered a good shot. And if your firing solution was correct, you drilled it. Okay? If everything goes right. There's a lot of stuff that can potentially go wrong, but that's relatively simple. A lot of guys talk about different ways of mechanically breaking that up, but basically you want to do it slow and easy as to not disturb the lay of the rifle. The best way to do this is you got your finger. You see that finger there? Right? Okay? On the center, there's a joint here, and then the tip of the finger. You want the trigger to be situated right in the middle, okay, of this segment of the finger right here, the end segment. This is your trigger finger, you know, okay? So you're gonna want that, and on the trigger itself, you're gonna want your finger positioned right in the middle of the trigger, right in the rearward, right where it's natural. You don't wanna go down here, you don't wanna come up here. That's gonna be goofy. You want it where it can be absolutely consistent. That's why it's curved like this, to keep your finger kind of centered where it should be. So you're gonna have that middle segment on the middle part of the trigger. Okay, make sure we're cocked. I'm gonna establish, I'm gonna see if my natural point aim's good. I'm exactly where I was. I got good, perfect sight picture. Move my finger onto the trigger. Natural respiratory pause, and then I'm gonna start the squeeze. There she goes. When the firing pin went, when the trigger tripped, my sights were exactly on target. And that's what you want to try to achieve. Now, if you're doing that slow and easy, and it's a surprise, the flinch is not going to be a problem. There are some triggers, like we discussed, the Huber triggers, or some of those, they're so precise of a crisp that you can kind of anticipate when it's going to go off, but it's such the timing is so tight to where you actually kind of dodge the effects of the flinch effect as well. And we explain that in the Huber review. But there's different, the better trigger you have, the more helpful it could be potentially. But it's a relatively simple process. One last thing concerning everything is there's a thing called follow through. All right, let's say everything was perfect. I send it. Rifle goes bang, recoil, right? Preferably, I'm gonna wanna maintain this exact moment before the rifle went bang. I'm gonna wanna maintain that through the recoil, and so that I'm still positioned behind the optic nice and squarely. My finger is still kind of to the rear, okay? As it was when it went bang. And everything's exactly the same. This is called follow through. And what this helps you do is you might be able to spot your own bullet trace through the optic. Now, if this thing goes bang and I go, oh, like this, and I get nervous, oh man, and then I look up to try to see where it hits, like perch up my head like a bird, I'm gonna miss a lot of stuff going on down there. So if you're gonna be your own spotter, you're gonna wanna practice follow through. This is what most of your serious marksmen try to train you to do, especially for one of these rifles, is so you're gonna wanna maintain that. Now, if you're shooting a semi-auto, it's okay to let your finger off for the reset afterwards. And realistically, a lot of guys will argue the details of how long you have to maintain that follow through. Usually you want to maintain the follow through. What I'm talking about is after it goes bang, you're going to want to stay in that same exact position that you were in. You're going to want to do that until you see impact. Once you see impact, you can go ahead and relax, cycle the bolt, whatever you're going to do. You're done. Once you've seen where the bullet actually went, then you can apply the correction to your scope and re-engage, or take another shot if you're right on, or bug out, or whatever you got to do. But you're going to want to maintain that follow through long enough to kind of see where you hit. That's the idea of it. And also, follow through is going to be a quality assurance mechanism which makes sure that you're doing everything perfectly consistent from shot to shot to shot. So if you maintain all those different things, a good sound, comfortable firing position, you got good sight picture, you employ good breath control, you wait till a natural respiratory pause, and then you squeeze the trigger when your sights are absolutely perfect. When they wiggle off a little bit, you just pause your squeeze and wait until the sights are perfect again. Then you go ahead and make sure you have got another natural respiratory pause, or you stop your breathing for a second, and you start your trigger squeeze again where you left off. And you do it nice and smoothly as to not disturb the lay of the rifle. If you're laying directly behind the rifle consistently, like when you had it zeroed and it trips, goes bang, you consciously, you're fixed. You're in a fixed position, you follow through, it goes bang, but you still have your cheek well, both your eyes are still open. You might blink when this happens, that's really hard not to blink. But by the time you're done blinking, you should be able to watch your bullet trace come down into the target zone, and you'll be able to spot where you were hitting. That's how you deliver a shot and follow those basic fundamentals of marksmanship for the shooting application. There's more detail to it, obviously, but I like to try to keep it simple. You can fill in the blanks any way you would like, really. But it's a relatively simple process, and even if someone's arguing with you, there's different ways different guys like to do this. But that's the main points right there. All right, let's get out of here.